If you've ever wondered about the inner workings of a newsroom or what a career in journalism looks like, there is a new book you need to pick up. Steve Murphy is offering up his lessons learned from his very impressive 45 years in the news business in his new book. There it is there. It is called Murphy's Logic. He's always made a lot of sense to me, I have to say that. Steve Murphy is joining us from Halifax this morning. So good to see you, Steve.
Well, that's a kind endorsement, Lindsay. Thank you.
Now, listen, Steve, for decades, you brought viewers the facts. You brought us the voices on the top stories and the voices of the top newsmakers of the day. And now we are hearing your voice. What was it like finally putting your opinions down on paper?
Well, Lindsay, it was liberating. The truth is, I think when you do what we do every day, which is try to report the facts fairly accurately and with balance, we park our opinions at the door when we come into the newsroom or into the studio, as you do every day. But the opinions are still there. And hopefully people who are in our profession, our trade, have those opinions and know where to leave them, which is out of the reporting. Now that I'm not reporting anymore, those opinions are liberated. And I must tell you, many of them have been just waiting for an opportunity to get out of the bottle.
I can't imagine holding that in for decades. Now, you've done approximately 5,000 formal interviews. You've talked to, what, 5 sitting Canadian prime ministers, 3 former prime ministers.
That's right.
But you write this: no single person I interviewed during my time in the news business brought me closer to some of the most significant people and events of my childhood and youth than Jesse Jackson. How so?
Right. Well, I was raised in the 1960s. One of my earliest fragmentary memories is of the assassination of John F. Kennedy in 1963, 60 years ago, when I was but 3 years of age. So I have fragmentary memories of that period of time. But Lindsay, by the late 1960s, when Dr. King and Bobby Kennedy were assassinated, I was an 8-year-old boy becoming aware of the world around me. And of course, Jesse Jackson was someone who was either physically there or very close to RFK when he was gunned down. Jackson went on to become a leader of the civil rights movement, something with which I was also raised. He was an anti-war voice at a time when there was a great deal of unrest over the Vietnam conflict. Later, of course, he became a political figure. So all of those things really came together when I sat down with Reverend Jesse Jackson in Halifax a number of years ago, and I realized that I was in the presence of a person who had been in the presence of so many people and so many great things that had occurred in my lifetime. So I felt a certain connection with Reverend Jackson. Even though he was an American figure, I was certainly well aware of all of which he had been part.
What a moment for you. And I have to mention, I mean, you're not just talking about the big gets and the interviews that you admire, and you get into some of your biggest regrets and mistakes as well, including Donald Marshall Jr.,
Yes.
Stéphane Dion, that interview that made news for all the wrong reasons. Why was it important for you to include those stories?
Well, Lindsay, I think if you're going to demand accountability of others, as we do in the practice of our work every day, it's very important to be accountable for your own actions, and that includes your own mistakes. And in the case of my comments about Donald Marshall Jr. way back in the mid-1980s, I said a number of things about Donald Marshall's case and about Donald Marshall that were just plain wrong. And I never had the opportunity to correct those things until now, and I've taken the opportunity to correct them. I've also taken the opportunity to clarify some of the details around the Stéphane Dion case, because a great deal of what people, I think, believe about what happened with Mr. Dion back in 2008, at least so far as I and we were concerned, are not accurate or certainly not in context. So it's important, I think, to try to set your own record straight, and that's what I've tried to do.
A lot has changed in the news business, Steve. We know that from the time you started out to when you signed off. I remember doing a story at CTV Atlantic. Leo Carter had assigned me the story of what is Twitter. And I remember thinking, Steve, I was like, what is this thing? I don't understand this. I was like trying to make sense of it all. What are your thoughts when it comes to social media and its impact on storytelling?
Ironically, we're still asking that question. What the heck is Twitter?
True.
I mean, we're not sure anymore. Look, news hasn't changed in terms of the news that we do every day. It's supposed to be fair and accurate and balanced. What has changed is the delivery method, which is now in our pockets every day, whether it's Twitter or X, whether it's TikTok, whether it's Facebook, if we could get our news back on there, which I think we have to try to do. The whole point is it's the delivery method that's changed, and a lot of what is in these social media platforms looks like news, but it isn't. And as consumers of that information, we need to be very, very careful to put up a filter to help us determine what can be believed versus what should not be believed. And of course, as creators of that content, You and I and people like us have to go out of the way to make sure that we are wholly accountable for what we report. And one of the great advantages that the so-called and much maligned mainstream media brings to the table is that we are accountable through laws and regulations and through authorship. If someone doesn't like what they hear or see on your morning, this morning, they know how to contact you and they know how to get redress should it be necessary.
Listen, I have to mention one more thing because this really is a full circle moment for me. Steve, I think I've told you before that before I came to work at CTV Atlantic, I was trying to do all my research to know who was working at the station. So I read your autobiography before the camera. And that was what, in 2000?
Really?
And say,
You
of
were the
course
one.
I did. And I found it absolutely fascinating. Here I am. That was the book that I read and I held on to it. And I reread it too after I started to get to know you. So that was the first book I read of yours. Now here I am. And I cannot tell you, page 75, you mentioned my name. Can I tell you what it was?
Yes, I know, but I made a mistake. I made a mistake in mentioning your name. I referred to your work on CP24, not here on CTV this morning. So I hope you know that I took steps to correct that in the second edition.
Well, you did send me an email. I can't tell you what that means to me to be mentioned in your book. I just feel like it's such a full circle.
Oh,
Great
thanks.
to see you, Steve Murphy. Always a pleasure.
Likewise.
All right, Steve Murphy's new book is called...
Thanks for the time this morning, guys.
You as well. All right, it's called Murphy's Logic.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you liked this, be sure to subscribe here, or you can check out more Your Morning videos right here.